Hello, today is February 12th, 2007. We're at the home of Mr. Nolan Ashburn at his home in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans Oral History Project. Welcome, Mr. Ashburn, and thank you very much for participating in this project. If we could, let's start out if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, when and where you were born, a little bit about your family and such.
I was born in Wilder, Tennessee in 1923, April the 8th. My father was a coal miner, and he was a World War I veteran, the first American soldier wounded in World War I. He received a shrapnel burst the first day he was on line with the 1st Infantry Division, Blackjack Pershing's division, who was first on the line, of course. And he went to the hospital, but he had received a number of facial wounds and shoulder wounds from the burst of the artillery shell that he didn't get ducked fast enough, and so he wound up in the hospital. They sent him back into the line after about a month or two. Medical care was rather primitive at that time, and so he was apparently healed, but really was not, because he had received shrapnel that had gotten lead that had gotten into his bloodstream. The wound killed him some 7 years later, and he came back. In fact, he stayed in Germany for 1 year after the war ended in the hospital. He came back to Wilder, Tennessee, married my mother, who was 17 years old at the time, met her. She was a coal miner's daughter, and I was born 9 months later, and my father was hospitalized then until the next 3 years, and he died in a veterans hospital in Johnson City, Tennessee, from that wound.
Memories of your father?
I have no memories of my father, obviously, and my mother never remarried, so I'm an only child. My memories are just what my mother told me. I would not recognize, I wouldn't be able to recognize him. I was only 3.5 years old, just a baby.
Yeah.
So whenever World War II broke out, my mother had left me to be raised with my mother, who was a young woman, never remarried, but she was unable to support me, so she left me to grow up with her sister, who had in Sparta, Tennessee. So I grew up in Sparta, Tennessee. When I was 18, I went over, graduated as valedictorian in my class, went over to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and I was a first quarter freshman whenever the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I was 18 years old.
Do you remember where you were and
Yes.
that day when it bombed and what you were thinking?
It was on they bombed, it was a Sunday. They bombed on a Sunday. The place that I was staying at the university, I was actually in a boarding house, at the University of Tennessee. And they did have a phone, but on Sunday we had gone somewhere with some of the other boys who lived in the boarding house. And so my mother then did not know where to reach me at all. So she called me on Monday night and said, I know you, Nolan, I know you have heard about the attack of the Japanese. And so remember your father and don't volunteer, don't do anything, just stay in school. And I said, Mother, this was Monday night. I said, Mother, you've called too late. We all went out and joined this morning, Monday morning. They weren't open, you know. I said, all of the boys in the house went out and joined Monday morning.
Now, could you, as an only child, could you have been exempt from military service? Was there any sort of rule in that regard?
They really wouldn't. They would let the draft was on, of course, and they would leave you in school because I was taking ROTC, which is Reserve Officers Training course, ROTC. And so I was in that class like all the others were who were male freshmen, which was most of the class at the University of Tennessee back then. There were very few females. So we all took ROTC. Well, ROTC was sort of like, well, you're sort of in training in the Army, you know, so they wouldn't call you up until they desperately needed the troops, because they had the draft going and they really had no place for us to go. So I stayed at the University of Tennessee. I got in 2 years at the University of Tennessee before they called up the ROTC group. Then I went to camp. It was a camp at that time, Atterbury, Indiana. No, not Indiana. Take it back. Atterbury was later. Went down to Fort McClellan, Georgia. They called us all in, all of the ROTC unit. That would have been about in 41, 42. Probably the spring of 43, 1943.
So
been at school 2 years.
So the group of you from the university
kind of
traveled together, or were you guys all split off?
We were all split off.
Okay.
Some of us went to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and went on down to Fort McClellan in Alabama, and so we sort of got split up.
Okay.
I wound up with a couple of guys that I knew from the University of Tennessee. We'd been in the same fraternity.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was just by accident because we all got split up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a whole group. So anyway, we took basic training then at Fort McClellan in Alabama that summer, and then the Army instituted a new program that those who qualified, if you went to ASTP, which was a Army Specialized Training program that they initiated, because here again they still didn't need the troops, didn't need us. We'd had basic training, that was it. In the Army Specialized Training program, you could not be higher than a PFC. They wouldn't take anybody that was already a sergeant or a corporal or anything like that. It was all ASTP was all PFCs that finished basic training that summer. In all the colleges, and a lot of colleges around had those ASTP units. My ASTP unit was down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So I was back in college at the University of Alabama. I was in the Army, wearing a uniform, but they marched us over to class. I mean, we were in the Army. We were just like we'd been in basic training. Basic training over to the ASTP, and went from Fort McClellan, Alabama to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to the University of Alabama. Well, we stayed at the University of Alabama, let me see, 44, that lasted 3 quarters. So I got another 3 years of college at Army expense.
Which would eventually tack on to your degree. You could use
Yeah,
as you got credit. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's why I went back to the University of Alabama, because I only needed another year after the war ended to have BS in geology. But anyway, they broke up. Then it was just before the invasion of Europe, you know, D-Day and so on in '44. They decided, well, we'll need more troops, so they broke up ASTP and sent us all back to infantry units. We came out of the infantry, we went back to infantry units. And so went back up to Indiana, that was a replacement sort of deal, and joined the 106th Infantry Division, which was being formed. It was the last division formed in the U.S. Yeah, and so we were, when D-Day came along in June, we were finished with another little training cycle at Camp Atterbury, Indiana there, and we were the 106th Division, and I was a PFC Jeep driver in the heavy weapons and mortar platoon. And so they shipped us over as a full division, the last full division that went overseas. So D-Day came, and they were assembling us, and we got shipped over early in September of '44.
Where did you depart out of?
We departed out of New York, went across on the old British troop-carrying ship called the Aquitania, which was the same age as the Lusitania that was sunk in World War I. So we went and was manned by the British Navy, and we had a full regiment on that ship. Regiment's about 4,000 men. So,
can you describe the crossing a little bit? I've heard all sorts of stories about what those crossings were like.
The crossing was fine. We went across. It was sort of late in the war, and the submarine scare wasn't as bad, although we did sight a submarine, German sub, going across the Atlantic. So they took us down south from New York, and then we kind of skipped across over to the Azores and back up the coast to Glasgow, Scotland. But the trip, as I remember, it took about 8 days. We had one scare where a sub was sighted, and as I say, we were flying solo. We were going solo across with 4,000 troops.
No, you weren't in any convoy.
We had no convoy, and we had no way of even. It was a troop carrier, you know. They had no defense. It is a troop carrier on the old Aquitania. I mean, they were barely feeding us 2 meals a day. You'd go and stand in line, and the line will wind all the way around the ship, because it's not a huge ship for 4,000 people. Saltwater showers, so you couldn't take a shower because you can't. But we did. The food was fairly, you know, I mean, it was adequate. It wasn't anything extra, because, as I say, 2 meals a day, and they had old troop carrier like that. You know, they had tables that you didn't sit down; you just stood up at a table, 6 or 8 of you around one table, and they'd slop out something. You'd eat, and then you go back, and we slept in hammocks that were 4 deep. And so you had to kind of load into the hammocks from bottom to top in order to sleep. So they were like, you know, sort of like coffins, canvas, just sleeping on canvas. But it wasn't bad, particularly other than the scare, you know, from submarines. But it was late in the war, and we just had that. one sighting.
Well,
So we
growing
got
up,
across.
growing up in Tennessee, did you get your sea legs, or did you? How was that? Did you get sick at all? Or?
I did not get sick, and for some reason or other, I've never been seasick. Even though I grew up in Tennessee, and you know, my episodes on the water were all just swimming in the river, Calfkill River, which runs through Sparta, and I knew how to swim, but I never got seasick for some reason or other. A lot of guys got seasick. They couldn't stand to go down there and smell that, just smell the food, and so they just lay in their bunks all day. There wasn't anything to do. There was no way to even exercise on deck. We had to wind all the way around the deck, you know, to get in line for the food. 2 meals a day. That was it. Ate breakfast in the morning. Took about 3 hours to feed, or 4 hours to feed everybody at breakfast, and then you kind of go back and lay down in your bunk if you or whatever. And there wasn't room to walk around decks much. It was just real crowded, very crowded. So yeah, we landed over in Glasgow, Scotland, and then took the train down to. We left Atterbury, Indiana, and we went to Atterbury, England.
Oh, is that right?
Village. Yeah, they broke us up. We were quartered around southern England there, waiting for transport across the Channel and going to the front lines. And so it took about, I think we were at Atterbury in late September, practically all of October, waiting to get the division all over there and get them together.
Mm-hmm. During that time, did you have time to? Did you get leave to go off and explore England at all? And
no. We went out and practiced being a soldier every day. Weather was miserable. It got kind of miserable. Rained a lot in October, but we were out there, you know, getting our weapons and getting the rolling stock, the jeeps and the trucks and everything in shape. And we hauled all our own equipment to see across. That came on another transport, not with us. All we had with us was our rifles and our uniforms and things like that, that were with us. And then we had to get all that assembled down in southern England, because it was landed in Glasgow in Scotland and brought down by train or by trucks, army transport trucks or whatever. Took about a month to get everything assembled, I should say. So that was a pretty decent time, and the food was, you know, we got fed 3 times a day, and we were out in daytime still doing army routine things, but in at night, and then we got off like on Sundays in the little villages around you could go, and they didn't have much to, we had money, but they didn't have much to sell you in southern England at that time, because they'd been in the war 5 years, so they had, you know, they were being food rationed themselves. But it wasn't bad. Wasn't real nice, but it wasn't bad. You know, it wasn't as bad as it got later.
Well, now, speaking of that, did they keep you up to date on how the war was going on, or did you ever mingle with soldiers that had been there and got an idea what was going on over there?
No, because if a soldier had been there, they didn't come back to our unit. See, we were a brand new unit. We didn't talk to anybody. They didn't give us leave. I never got to London even, and I was at Atterbury, and I don't think I was over 40 or 50 miles south of London, but I never got leave. They were assembling the division, you see, and so we could go in that little small village that we were in, Atterbury, but they had nothing there particularly. Now, some of them did get leave to go, like if you were an officer, maybe, you know, maybe you got to leave some.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you have a general idea, though, an overall general idea on how the war was going, or what,
Oh, yeah,
how we were doing,
got
or
reports.
Yeah.
The Army report, official reports would come down that we were, we were pushing the Germans back daily, things like that. And we got copies of Stars and Stripes, and so that would report, well, we're winning the war, and frankly, I think most of us thought the war would be over before we ever got over to France. We, as I say, we were the last division,
Yeah.
and of course the news was all good. We were moving the Germans back daily, back to the Siegfried line towards the Rhine. The Russians were moving them back from the east daily, so it looked like the war was over. In fact, we assumed we'd wind up there about the time on the line about the time the war ended, and we'd be in the Army of Occupation for a year because we wouldn't have enough points to come back home. That was kind of the
general feel.
That was the general feeling at the time, that we were so late in the war and we were winning the war, and it was just a matter of time until it's over, and then we'd have to stay over as the last ones overseas. And so we, at that time, we all assumed we'd never see any action.
Yeah.
We wouldn't get over there as a division in time to do anything. And they stuck us, that's exactly the way it started. They just stuck us up there, the whole division. We relieved the 2nd Infantry Division, and the 2nd moved out of those positions. We took their positions, and then they were going to go up on the winter campaign, and that would end the war. The 2nd, and in fact, when we relieved the 2nd on line, those guys had been up there 6 or 8 weeks. They hadn't had a shell fired on them.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah, it was like a rest camp for all of them, and they were about to cry when we came up, and they said, now we got to go, they hadn't had a casualty. No, the 2nd had, in our particular segment, they hadn't had a casualty in 6 weeks that they'd been up there. That's how quiet it was, I said, boy, are you lucky you're coming up here, and now we've got to go over and join the 1st and the 101st and so on, and we're going to attack those dams up at the Roar River.
Well, let's back up a little bit, and can you start then from leaving England and crossing over and tell the story from that?
We went across the channel, English Channel, landed in Le Havre, and got there, France, it got colder. We were there late in November. That's how long it had taken, late in November.
What was the scene like there? Was there still a lot of damage?
There was a lot of damage in Le Havre. In fact, we landed in Le Havre. There was no fighting, of course.
Yeah, right.
It was a secure port.
Yeah.
And then we were trucked up to the front lines from Le Havre up to the 2nd, and it took about a week to get our whole division up there. In fact, so that the last units in the division, and they took all the artillery support and all that stuff, because they just strung us out on a 27-mile front with one division, and so they took all the support with them because they were going up and do that attack up to the north. That's going to be the final wind-up of the war. It was that last attack. In fact, the word was that the war would be over by Christmas. The Germans would be done by Christmas. That was And as I say, that was the word that we got, you know, and of course Stars and Stripes, very optimistic, and yeah. And Patton was moving with his the Third Army was moving to the south, and we were in the First Army, and then they were taking the First Army troops up to the north, and we were just going to start moving towards the Rhine River. Well,
that all changed.
It all changed. It all changed about 4 days before Christmas. And then all hell broke loose on us. And we hadn't been on the line long enough to even get communication lines set up, you know, between and it was a patchwork division. We had guys in there who'd been transferred out of the ground crew of the Air Corps, and things like that, you know, just to beef up the numbers. That's all. And ourselves, my particular group, we'd been in college. We had basic training, but we'd been in college a year, and just they pulled out, you know, they collapsed ASTP and sent us up there and got us ready to go overseas. So, and let's see, probably I was, 43, I'd have been about 20 years old then, yeah. Yeah, I was about 20 then. Been in college, except for once 90 days, I had about 90 days of basic training, that's all.
Yeah.
You know, and I wasn't the only one, you know, I mean, it was all throughout my regiment, my division. And a lot of the other guys, as I say, they'd transferred out of the Air Corps, ground crews and all, anything to just get some troops together. In fact, we thought we were going to be the Army of Occupation. Yeah. Is what we thought.
And then so the Germans had their final desperate thrust, which became the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah. Their final. They pulled their troops, a lot of troops off of they beefed up their troops off of the Eastern Front because the Russians were ling towards Berlin all the time from the east, so they gave up over there, moved a whole bunch of those, a large number of those troops over to the Western Front, and then pulled all the ammunition that they had and one thing and the other, and the tanks over, because they were going to try to reach Amsterdam and sue for peace. And they didn't want to, they knew that they weren't going to be able to sue for peace from the Russian side, and they thought they could probably salvage some sort of agreement that would preserve the country if they could make it to Amsterdam and then sue for peace. And surrender on the Western side.
So what was it like when they started the battle, and do you remember
when
how?
They started the battle, we'd been on my particular company had been online about 3-4 days, so we'd been getting oriented. We were just about 5 miles ahead of St. Vith. The division headquarters was in St. Vith, Belgium. Well, the brunt of the thrust of the Germans came down that road with tanks and so forth to St. Vith. So after the first day, we started an evacuation of St. Vith, the headquarters for the whole division, and the other 2 regiments got surrounded. See, our positions were up about, we were way on we had a 27-mile front, and we were on about the most southerly 10 miles of it. The other 2 divisions were up, regiments, not divisions. The other 2 regiments, and they lined us up on line. north to south, 422nd, 423rd, 424th. I was in the 424th. Well, 422nd, 423rd were up there closer to where the Germans were thrusting to get through the rail. There was a railroad there too that came out of Germany, and so they wanted that railroad and the main roads came north of us. We were on the southern end, down towards Bastogne. In fact, Bastogne, where the 101st was on our right. They were the next division south of us.
Huh. For some reason I would have had it reversed. I don't know why I always thought that.
Yeah, Bastogne was to the south of us, so the 101st Infantry Division was down defending. So the Germans would try to break over Bastogne and St. Beth to the north. We were in between those two spots. My regiment, 422nd, 423rd, 424th. And so each of us had about a 9-mile front. Well, what saved us was the gap between. We didn't get, we got surrounded, but we didn't get, any heavy shelling or anything like that where I was.
Were you aware that you were surrounded, or
No.
because there was no communications, right?
There was no communications. We didn't know anything. We were broken apart. Well, the 422nd, 423rd just surrendered. This guy wrote this book. He was in the 424th, but he was over liaison with the 423rd, and as he said, he didn't even know they were surrounded, but they got surrounded. He surrendered the second day on mine up there.
Hmm.
You see, because of the time and the weather, the first 4 or 5 days we'd been online, the weather was fairly decent. It was cold, but it wasn't snowing. But the breakthrough came whenever it started snowing, and and of course we hadn't been there long enough to even be oriented. I honestly could not tell you which way was east, west, north, or south. I didn't know which way to run. Where do you go?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, to get out. And so, let's see, does that answer? I guess that answers that question.
Well, what were you feeling like at that time? Was there fear, or
Well,
what? I mean, what goes through a person's mind?
Well, I was cold. You know, it was only that in my case, I was no longer even thinking. I was just an animal, like trying to survive. You know? I was cold. I was hungry. I was scared. Didn't get sleep even at night. You had to lay down in the snow, and you ought to read this guy's book about how you couldn't feel your feet. You were walking around on stumps, you know, and we weren't getting so much artillery coming in at us as they did further north. But as I say, we didn't know which way to go. It's just, you're out in the cold and you go this way and you run into firing. And so you go, well, back up and go the other way. Stuff like that. And we weren't getting any food, of course, because we were surrounded and isolated, so there was you had whatever you had on, and that was it.
So you didn't have proper clothing as well? I mean,
Oh no, we weren't dressed for winter weather at all. No, that's why we had so many cases of frozen feet. As I say, and once it started snowing like that, you know, the snow went on. We were out in deep snow for, I don't know, 10 days or something.
I think, didn't they say that was like the worst winter Europe had experienced in like 50 years?
It was. It's the worst winter in 50. That was what I read later. It was the worst winter they'd had in 50 years. By the way, in his book there, he gives the temperatures. He looked them up. And he was a PW at those temperatures, but he was indoors as a PW.
Yeah.
Now, they weren't feeding him anything particularly, but we were outdoors.
And you couldn't build a fire because that give away your position, right?
Well, we had nothing to build a fire with. When the snow was like this snow that hit here, what do you do outside? When the snow is like it was here over Christmas.
Yeah.
What can you do out there? And you're outside. You're not inside, you know. You're outside. What can you do? How do you survive? Well, we just went through, you know, I was in Australia, but
I can't imagine. I can't
you just
fathom
lay down in a snowbank and shiver. You're hungry.
How do you think you? Well, I guess you said you
You
kind of
just
developed an
couldn't-
animal instinct, but I wonder how
Yeah.
you think with all those elements thrown at you. No lack of sleep, improper clothing, no food, the stress of war, all that playing on you. I don't know how a person functions.
Well, you don't, first of all, I think, I know what happened to me. You just don't think anymore. You just become like an animal. It's just trying to survive. All you really can, you know, I had no thought, really. It's just miserable.
Yeah.
And so, 2 or 3 times I figured, well, I'll never, you know, I'll just lay down here and die in the snow. That's all. I wish I could get warm first, but, or if I remember a thought that I had, it would be, I sure wish I could feel my feet again one more time before I get killed. I'm never going to survive. It's sort of fatalistic, I think, you know. And someone will say, well, let's go over here. Okay.
With everything scattered, was there somebody in charge, or were you guys just pretty much on your own?
No,
just
we were on our own about 10 days of it. We were more or less on our own, just a little group.
Wow.
Out wandering around in the snow trying to figure out where to go, what to do, and our only concern was trying to get warm if we could, get her, you know, and get something to eat, anything.
Which leads to another story. You talked a little bit. Describe your Christmas Eve 1944 dinner.
Oh, now that was the highlight of the of the. I think there were 4 of us, and we'd gotten rounded up by that time. We presumably were attached to the 82nd Airborne. They shot some trucks up there with them on it. They didn't fly in, you know.
Yeah.
They couldn't weather. In fact, there was nobody in the air at all. And so we ran across. One of the other guys did. I didn't, but he found a can of corned beef hash, and this was Christmas. And so we got my little group at that time. We ran into some soldiers, some out of the 82nd Airborne that had come up, and I think that's where the hash came from, corned beef hash. And so there were 4 of us, and of course we're out in this, you know, there's no shelter. We're out in the snow and one thing and another under some trees, and we opened up the corned beef hash with a bayonet. Still had a bayonet, and we spooned out. We had no eating utensils. We long since lost like anything like that. So we spooned out. Everybody got 2 or 3 mouthfuls of that corned beef hash, and then we were supposed to go down that night and attack the little village of Manhay. Some sergeant or something out of the 82nd Airborne had come over and found us and said, well, we're going to go down and attack Manhay tonight. There's a German strong point down there. Manhay was important because it had a railroad track, and so they were bringing some of the equipment in on the railroad. The Germans were. Okay, so Manhay was kind of a strong point. We'd been rounded up, joined some elements, the 82nd Airborne, who come up on trucks. Probably that day or the day before. Anyway, so we spooned out that corned beef hash, and
which you said, I believe, it was frozen solid. It wasn't.
It's frozen solid. No, we had to dig it out with a bayonet. We didn't have a spoon to dig it out with, so we shared it. Everybody got a mouthful, you know, and we had snow, of course, so we had water, corned beef hash. That was Christmas Eve dinner. And the reason I remember it so well was because the Stars and Stripes and so on, when we were coming across France and so on, and we'd gotten up there past Thanksgiving, Stars and Stripes quoted Eisenhower that every soldier was going to get a turkey dinner for Thanksgiving, you know. Well, we'd missed the Thanksgiving dinner, but then Stars and Stripes said, and every soldier, Eisenhower guaranteed every soldier for Christmas was going to have a turkey. And they were bringing the supplies over from the U.S., you know. So Christmas dinner was Christmas Eve. And that's the only meal we had that day. So we ate that corned beef hash. And of course it was dark by then, you know. Germany in the wintertime, they only get about 6 hours, 7 hours of daylight or something. Yeah. So we all ran down the hill, wide open hill to Manhay,
did you have the strength? I mean, one meal a day.
Well, we didn't run, but
I mean, the strength just to fight, to go into a battle. Was there?
Yeah,
did you have the strength to do that?
Yeah, we were still mobile and walking. You know, we had ammunition and so on. So we went down, attacked Manhay. All I did was run down the snow and the trees, and one thing and another, and I didn't get hit by any of the fire, and so we took the village, I guess. I went down, fell in one corner of a basement there that was still intact, along with 2 other guys. That was it.
Were you able to find any additional supplies or food?
No,
down?
No.
I mean, at least you had a shelter now, huh?
Yeah, but we were indoors in the cellar. I mean, what the heck? You know. Yeah. And the next day, amazingly enough, that was Christmas Day. Amazingly enough, the sun came out the next day. We got up, and the Germans had pulled it back out of Manhay. They decided, you know, they were started their retreat. And then we got some supplies later on that next day from the 82nd.
Still trucking in, they weren't flying?
We were attached to them temporarily.
Were they able to start flying?
Yeah, they rounded us up. Yeah, the sun came out, and the airplanes came over. And from then on, it was, we just kept chasing back into Germany. We'd advance every day a few miles. And then we were getting supplies, too.
So conditions started to improve for you then?
Yeah. Considerably. We probably only lost a couple of guys after that, and that would be because if we went into a German village that they'd evacuate or something, they'd booby trap something. And I know one second lieutenant, he stepped on a landmine they planted, as they were retreating, and he blew his leg from off down below the knees.
Mm.
I never saw him again.
Yeah.
And, hauled him out, so that was one casualty. And then they had another casualty that I heard about, but I didn't actually see. It wasn't in my little group. The Germans would string tripwires up, and they had what they call bouncing betties, which would be a mine that wasn't really planted, but would be on top of the ground in the snow, just in the snow. And if you hit that tripwire, it'd bounce up.
Hmm.
So that was a leg wound too. But they weren't giving us much resistance, mainly after, and we started getting more food one thing. Mainly after that, it was just the cold and advancing every day in the snow. And as I say, the sun started coming out and it warmed up a little bit.
Did you have any temporary, lasting injuries to your feet from that cold, as far as frostbite?
No, some of the guys did.
Yeah.
And they had to have amputations. There were some amputations, and they'd get frozen feet and have to amputate. Keep blood poisoning, kill them. Yeah. I got a small wound right there, but that was from shrapnel back early on. So I never had, I had frozen, my feet were frozen and cold all the time, but I never suffered.
Good.
I guess I wasn't out long enough, or maybe I was young enough that had good circulation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
So you guys advanced, and you want to
Then
talk?
we kept advancing every day until we reached the Rhine River. We got over to the Rhine about probably, let's see, the Germans surrendered. Well, they couldn't find anybody to surrender to there for a while, but I think early in May. So we got all the way over to the Rhine River, little village of Heidesheim on the Rhine, on the west bank of the Rhine, and we were across from Mainz and Frankfurt. The Main River runs in there to the Rhine, and so we were right there, and working our way over there, daily practically. We kept rounding up German PWs, and so we wound up at Heidesheim, and we went. My unit, what was left of it, went to the west bank there, near that little village of Heidesheim, and we just went a 160-acre track, and we threw 2 strands of barbed wire around it, and we wound up with about 50,000 German PWs, which we guarded, presumably guarded. All we did was we set machine guns at opposite corners of the and said, don't touch the barbed wire or you'll be killed. And one guy did get killed.
Really?
I don't know, he was kind of a German soldier, probably been out starving, cold, and one thing and another, and so he got too close to barbed wire, and one of the guards shot him because we used our machine guns to opposite corners. Just to have barbed wire around 160.
Did you have any interaction with any of the prisoners? I mean, no.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
Actually, well, we did. I'll take it back. We did because we had a ration of cigarettes and food, and if the Germans had anything of value, like their wedding rings or anything like that, they'd trade it for food. And so there was that trading went on with the guard. We were the guards, and so they'd come over, and if they had anything of value that you were willing, I never made a trade myself directly, although I didn't smoke, but a lot of the guys would trade them cigarettes,
Mhm.
rings,
Mhm.
whatever. Yeah, we had. I think we had 60,000 PWs there, and we just had one little company guarding them.
Wow.
So I went swimming in the Rhine River. We were there in June, and then I got shipped out because they started discharging or getting ready for discharging the guys who had been in combat the longest and had on a point system.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who didn't have enough points to be sent back to the States immediately, they rounded us up and sent us down to Marseille, France, to Lucky Strike Camp Arles. And I was down there waiting for transport to go over and invade the Philippines, because we'd got most of the 106 who'd been over there so recently we didn't have any points built up on that point system discharge. I'd been in the Army long enough, but I hadn't been over, they were bringing you back to the States under a point system, about how long you'd been over, did you get wounded, and stuff like that. So early in August, when they dropped the 2 atom bombs, I was in Camp Lucky Strike at Arles, France, 50 miles north of Marseille, waiting for a ship to bring me back to and we were going to go through the Mediterranean, down the Suez Canal, across the Indian Ocean, up to the Philippines, and the word was that we'd be placed in another invasion unit, and we'd attack the Japanese mainland the 1st of October. That was the plan.
What was your thoughts there? Did you have word on just how vicious the fighting was? Did you know what it was like over in the Pacific as far as
yeah.
Yeah.
Because, see, I'd been in the States, and whenever all the big battles occurred, and actually I had an uncle that was in the 3rd Marines, and he got wounded on Saipan when we took it. So, yeah, we knew how bad. Nobody in Camp Lucky Strike was looking forward to going over and invading the Japanese mainland. Yeah. That was what it was. The date was October 1. And we'd just gotten through. Yeah. And so nobody was looking forward to that. So when they dropped the 2 atom bombs, I didn't know what an atom bomb was even. At first I'd heard of it. I didn't know everything was secretive, hush hush. None of us, I think there were about 6,000 of us waiting there in Camp Lucky Strike for that ship. So since we had the fort pretty well plugged up, when the ship, the troop ship Argentina came over, they had to bring us back to the States to clean out the port so the High Point men could come down and be sent back to the States. So I got back to the States in October.
That must have been a sense of relief.
Oh, Lord. Yes. Yeah. I knew I'd never make it through another campaign, it's impossible. But that was the plan at the time. And of course we'd read about, all the other Japanese battles and so on. Yeah, I knew all those by heart because they were in the news and so forth. So, no, it was quite a relief. And I said, gee, I wish they'd have dropped them sooner, the atom bombs, We didn't have any bleeding hearts down there, about, about sacrificing the civilian population. You didn't care.
Well, I guess there's always been somewhat of a controversy as to whether it was the right thing to do, but I imagine your opinion of that was...
My opinion was, why didn't he do it sooner? And then I found out later on, well, they couldn't do it any sooner because they didn't have the atom bombs. And they only had 2 at that time. Yeah. So I understood why, but didn't mean anything to me. I just thought it was a big bomb of some kind that worked up. But when we heard the news, it wasn't until I got back in the States, and started reading
That you truly understood what it was.
Did I understood exactly what it was. That they dropped. All I knew was that what they published, dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so.
Do you remember where you were, what the camp was like when they got word over?
Oh, when we got word about the first bomb being dropped, and then the second bomb just a week later, and that the Japanese were suing for peace, that camp erupted. When we got the news on the radio, we went out. I mean, everybody had weapons, of course, and so we were out shooting them in the air and jumping up and down, and it was Christmas.
Yeah.
It came early. I mean, because if the Japanese surrendered, we knew that we might have to stay there for a while getting back to the States, but the war was over.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to go do anything else.
Yeah.
So, no, it just erupted. You never heard so much gunfire and shouting and jumping up and down for joy and everything, because every one of us was there waiting to go to Japan.
So you took the transport back to the States.
Yeah, Argentina brought us back to the States, and so.
How much longer then were you in the service before you were officially discharged?
I was officially discharged about the end of November. I came back. The Argentina came back to New York, and then I went down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for the discharge, and stayed down there about a month, just hanging around waiting. And first I got 2 weeks leave to go back to Tennessee and visit my wife, and then I went back to Fort Bragg and stayed about another 2 or 3 weeks, because they were just lined up discharging people, In other words, they just had several thousand that were being discharged. So I finally got officially discharged about the 20th of November and got back to my hometown pretty close to the 1st of December.
What was that like, that when you had that 2-week furlough to go home? Getting home after what you'd been through, the homecoming, that must have been, describe what that was like?
Oh yeah, it was, everybody, you were a hero.
Yeah.
You came back, and I don't know, it was a fun time.
Was there anything in particular you'd want to do when you get back? Go eat a restaurant, or was there anything in your mind that thought, when I get back, Mom told me about apple pie?
No, I'm back, so there wasn't anything that I was eating regular, and so it was just a very nice time in your life,
How was it once you were discharged? How was the transition from military life back to civilian life? Did you have much of an adjustment for you?
No, it wasn't too hard for me to adjust, because what I did is I went back to the University of Alabama.
Right away, or did you take some time off to?
No, I got discharged in November. I was back in college the 1st of January.
Is that right?
Yeah. Or the 2nd of January, whenever the classes started again. Yeah, I went there, because I'd gotten married before I went overseas, and she was out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So, I just enrolled under the GI Bill in college.
And you just had one more, you said it took just one more year to finish get your undergraduate?
Yeah, one more year to get a bachelor's degree. So I just went back to college. I was married this time, though, back in college, whereas when I was there before, I was single.
Let me back up and just ask one question in regards to that. Communications back and forth between your wife or your mother. How did you keep in touch pretty regular?
Well, no, hardly at all. We had B-mail back then, and our mail was censored.
Mm-hmm.
That was sent back to the States. Their mail coming over, if I got any, I think maybe I got 2 letters while I was overseas or something like that. it takes so long to get it delivered. First of all, there weren't all that many mail runs back and forth. They weren't flying them, you know, they were sending that V-mail over. And the V-mail was just very small little envelopes and one or just very small piece of paper. So I don't think my mother or my wife at that time even knew I was we were not allowed to say where we were when we wrote back. That would be deleted, and all the mail that we wrote was censored. When you were in the, it was all censored, and so that if you made reference to where you were, because that would be something you wouldn't want the enemy, in case they found the letter, to know, it was censored. So neither my mother nor my wife knew for sure I was in Europe.
Wow.
Until the Germans surrendered. They didn't know for sure. I was just somewhere overseas.
Did they ever talk about how they dealt with that uncertainty? How, particularly your mom, who had lost her husband because of the first war.
Yeah.
I mean, how they dealt with it?
No, they just. That's the way it was.
Yeah.
You know. Said. And so the Battle of the Bulge came along, and they got the news over there, and they said, "Well, I wonder if Nolan's in that battle."
Wow. And nowadays, troops can email from the front line.
Oh yeah, they get it. They get the news right after it happens. 15 minutes after it happens, you got an email. But no, there was, as I say, they didn't know for sure. In fact, I think after I got back, they said, "Well, I thought we vaguely heard that your division went to Italy." And I said, "No, we didn't go to Italy."
Were you able to talk about your experiences when you got home, or was it something you blocked out? Or
oh, well, I never talked about it because it's just.
Just wanted to forget and move on.
Yeah, I just moved on. I just moved in. I was young, you know. Well, and they didn't want to hear that. That stuff. About everybody was just elated that I made it back in one piece. So no, we never discussed it. Neither my wife nor my mother ever asked me anything about it. My mother in particular, because she had known how from my father, you know, because she was a young girl when she married him. He came back, he was 4 or 5 years old, he was 6 years older than she was or something like that. And so he'd talked to her about how things were there, you know, and she knew he was a sick man after she buried him. So they didn't discuss him.
Well, continue on with your post-war life. You got your undergraduate degree, and talk a little bit about where you went from there. And
well, I got a bachelor's degree in geology and geography, because that's what I'd been in at the University of Tennessee, at the University of Alabama. Then from the University of Alabama, I tried to get a job. But I had more college GI time left, and so I couldn't get a job whenever I got my bachelor's degree. So my wife, she had an aunt who lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at Louisiana State University, and so she had an apartment. Housing was at a premium after the war. You just couldn't get housing. I would have gone back to University of Tennessee, but we couldn't get any housing up there. I going back under the GI Bill, but we had no place to live. So she had an aunt who had a small apartment down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and so I enrolled down at Louisiana State University then after my bachelor's for a master's degree in geology, and we stayed in that small apartment. So since I was in geology, then as a one of the requirements down there to get a master's degree in geology was that you come out to, they had a geology camp out in Denver, south at Colorado Springs, which had been there since the 1920s. And if you were getting a degree in geology, you had to come out and take that summer camp. So I did 1 year at LSU, and then I came out to the summer camp, which was required, and I got a job as sort of like camp manager, which means I was the gopher in camp and took the course at the same time. And went back, finished up my master's degree, and I got a job then, still going to work on a PhD out of LSU, but I got a job up at Centenary College of Louisiana in Shreveport. They needed another geology teacher, so I got a job teaching geology up at Centenary while I'm working on my PhD. And I came out to Colorado again the second summer then, and then I was an instructor out at the camp, and still taking courses, see, from LSU. And we had a daughter born about that time, had a son earlier, so I heard about a job, and they weren't paying very well at Centenary College of Louisiana, you know, they were struggling along. So heard of oil company out of El Dorado, Arkansas was opening an office in Denver, and since I'd been out to the geology camp, obviously I knew something about the geology of the Rocky Mountains, and so I got a job working for an oil company. They moved me to Denver.
And that's what brought you to Colorado, huh?
That's what brought me to Colorado. Yeah, I'd been to Colorado the 2 summers before, but taking courses in geology. But that's what brought me to Colorado.
To settle in Colorado.
Yeah. And so I stayed then in the oil and gas business from then on until I retired. So that's how I got to Colorado.
Yeah.
I came out January 1950. Yeah. I've been in Colorado ever since.
Well, we'll start to wind down this interview, I guess.
Right.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about in the interview?
I can't think of anything.
Okay, all right. I guess one question I have for you is, how do you think the war affected your life, or played a role in your life, or changed your life in any way? How did that period of time in the war? How do you feel it affected you? Or
I think it changed my life entirely. In other words, we wouldn't be sitting here talking if I didn't survive the war.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I was, I was quite a young man. I was 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. So I was looking for something. So, subsequently, all of that would not have happened had I not been in the war.
Yeah.
Let's say that I've been wouldn't have been accepted in the army, in the military for some reason or other. Well, I'd have probably continued on to University of Tennessee and might have gone into the coal mining industry. I don't know. My life just did, a 90-degree turn. And of course, I got married, so
Yeah. Yeah.
all that happened
Yeah.
too as a young man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I don't know, what my life would have been, if the war didn't come along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does such things as that experience during the battle of the Bulge, does that affect your thought when you does like on the snowy winter we've gone through? I mean, does that?
I put, for some reason, I was able to put all that.
Is
out
that
of
right?
my
Yeah.
mind. Yeah, I did it. I remember parts of it, how cold and miserable and hungry and so forth, but I just put it out of my mind, went to work, lived.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't, I didn't think about it, never dreamed about it,
Yeah.
or, never.
Oh.
If I recited it to anyone like you, it's good stuff from the old memories I had of it.
Yeah.
I don't think I know it changed my life, a lot, maybe totally.
Yeah. Have you ever had a chance to go back to Europe and retrace some of your?
Oh, yes, I've
Yeah.
gone back 3 times.
Yeah.
And gone back to the same places that we were, with groups. In fact, one of, this fellow that wrote this, he was on one of those trips, that's where I met him.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for the first time. See, I didn't know him
Yeah.
During the war.
Yeah.
Well, he went PW, and
Yeah.
I'm still there fighting, but no, I've gone back 3 times over the years.
Yeah.
I joined this organization, this organization, the Cub of the Golden Line, was the 106th Infantry Division, and in 1948, some of the veterans of the 106, some had been PWs and so forth, a lot of them had been PWs, came back and started this organization, and it's still going on. And so several of the trips that I have made, in fact, we've had annual, yearly meetings of this Golden Line, the Cubs of the Golden Line, and I've been a member. Well, I heard about it after I got to Colorado, probably about 1950 or something like that. About 55, 1955. And so then we had annual meetings all over the U.S. In fact, we were supposed to be, our annual meeting was whenever the hurricane hit New Orleans. We were scheduled for an annual meeting down there.
Oh, is that right?
And they canceled it at the last minute when they heard about the hurricane coming. And then we had a makeup one later on in Washington, D.C. in November. We always had our meetings in August, late August before school started.
Mm-hmm.
But that one, we canceled it, the president of it canceled it at the last minute. We were supposed to stay down at one of those hotels that washed away or blew away or whatever, and we didn't go. But we did have that meeting later that year in Washington. So a lot of the, several of the members made trips back to Europe where we had been, and I've been on 3 of those trips over the years that span the time. Probably the first time I went would have been like 1980, 85 or somewhere along in there, and then 2 or 3 years later another group would go back to St. Viv and Manhattan, places.
How was it? How were the locals when they realized you were World War II veterans?
When the locals were very nice. Like they built memorial to us there at St. Vitt, which was headquarters of the division, and we were friends with Belgians.
Yeah.
We were on my division was on the Belgian side, not on the German
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
So they been real nice. In fact, they got this organization. Some of them even joined our organization.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Go back, real friendly and so on. I'd say the last 5 or 10 years, there haven't been very many trips over there.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten older.
Sure.
It's a lot of the guys don't travel anymore.
Yeah.
And you kind of lose. Well, you don't like the meetings now. When I went back to the one that took the place of the New Orleans meeting, there wasn't a single guy there that I'd ever seen before or recognized.
Yeah.
There was a local here in town who was going to go with me, but he canceled out at the last minute. And he was a PW. He was in the 423rd. And so Stan Tuhosky is his name. He's
to get his name.
here in town. Yeah. I don't know if you.
I haven't yet. No, I have to.
You can see. Well, he's still around, but he didn't go. But, yeah, I've gone back to all of the sites that we were at.
Under much nicer conditions, of course.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
and of course they've grown, over the years, so
Yeah.
it's real. And that was not a densely settled area to start with, I mean, it's very small little towns. Be cleared spaces around the towns where the fields were, where
Yeah,
they grew
yeah.
something, and the trees. It's the Ardennes forest, sort of, except it wasn't heavily wooded.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, why don't you pick up your medals there, and if you could briefly describe everything to
Well,
us.
these are common things.
Can I
This is-
have you turn it just? There we go.
Mainly, let's see, the Bronze Star, that's for serving in battle, and I never got I would have been eligible to go get a Purple Heart with that wound, but I never bothered to get one, so I don't have a Purple Heart. This is combat infantry, which means the wreath means the rifle is infantry, and the wreath around it means that I served in combat. And the others are campaign medals for areas that you served in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like that part, I think about 3 of these are down. And this is a good conduct pin. I never really got much in the way of medals because I really wasn't a collector of medals.
Yeah.
These all just came with my discharge, sort of.
Well, we'll wind down this interview. I want to thank you once again for participating in this project, but more importantly, I want to thank you very much for your service to our country.
Okay.